Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Dune in June, a new BookTube event where we read Frank Herbert's science fiction masterpiece, Dune, in the month of June. Read, past tense, would probably apply to those of you who are just doing the actual event, Dune in June, because the idea was to read the first part of Dune, which is called Dune, in the first week of June, and then the second part, Muad'Dib, in the second week of June, and then the third part, the Prophet, in the third week of June, which means you'd be cleaning up by now. You'd be done. But in the course of doing that sort of thing, I backed into a read-along of Dune, a chapter-by-chapter read-along of Dune. So that's what we're doing now, and of course we will continue long past when Dune in June is over. We'll be doing this all summer. We're still thickly ensconced in the first part of the book, which is a story of Duke Leto Atreides, who has been ordered by the Emperor to assume command of the world Dune, displacing the Harkonnens, his sworn enemies who controlled the planet before then. They control the planet, and they have been making quite a tidy living off it because the planet Dune is the only location where the spice melange can be found, which is a currency all throughout the Empire. It's more valuable than any kind of valuable item. It prolongs life. It imparts all sorts of extra abilities to adepts who use it. And it can only be mined on the sands of Dune and is zealously guarded by gigantic, ferocious sandworms that will attack a factory and can swallow one whole. They're absolutely enormous. Paul Atreides, the young heir of the Duke, has been curious about the sandworms right from the beginning. He's persistently asking questions about them. Even though he's got technically other things to think about, especially survival. Because the Harkonnens are not playing by the rules. They want to destroy House Atreides, and the Duke knows it. That he can expect the worst from them. Not only covert traps, but outright armed resistance, with covert help from the Emperor's own troops. He just doesn't know when the blow will fall, and he wants to make a go of it. He wants to make himself as strong as possible in order to resist, in order to fight back. Which involves not only sending his emissaries to the Fremen, the wild people of Dune, in an attempt to maybe create some armed battalions of them to train them militarily, but also getting to know the planet. The Duke wants to get to know the world that he has inherited. He wants to get to know what goes on there, specifically spice mining. And that brings us to the chapter that we're reading today, which is the first bravura chapter in Dune, the novel. It's a great book. It's terrific. Even the weakest chapters that we've seen so far have terrific writing and all sorts of great stuff in them. But there are some set-piece chapters in this book. And the chapter that we're reading today is one of those set-piece chapters. In this chapter, Duke Leto and his son and Gurney Halleck, his war master, and a group of armed escorts take armed helicopter-like devices, ornithopters. They are going to go out over the shield wall, out over the deserts, and see spice mining in process. They're going to inspect a spice trawler that are now the Duke's property. This will be the sole source of his wealth. So he wants to go and look at it himself, and he wants to take his son along. And they have a guide, the Imperial Planetologist, Kynes is his name. He has the blue-on-blue eyes of complete melange addiction. He is the blue-on-blue eyes of the Fremen. And as quickly becomes obvious once the Duke meets him, it's not just that he has those eyes. He's also Fremen. He's gone native and knows the Fremen's ways. It turns out he knows them a lot better than the Duke thinks he does. Because this chapter opens with the Duke and Gurney Halleck and Paul meeting the planetologist. They are going to get on an ornithopter, fly over the shield wall, and go out into the sands to look at spice mining. Although those are the events that the chapter narrates, Herbert once again gives us the viewpoint of everybody involved, including Kynes, who we are told in the first line of this chapter has been ordered to betray these people. Presumably the Emperor has enlisted Kynes, who is the judge of the change. He is supposed to oversee that all the forms are obeyed in moving one house out and one house in. Presumably, the Emperor has enlisted him to betray House Atreides. That's the first line of the chapter. Kynes is hostile to these people. He thinks the Harkonnens moved out, you moved in. More of the same. New boss, same as the old boss. And is a little bit scornful, more scornful than the Duke is used to hearing directly to his face about the PR campaign that the Duke's people have been doing to make sure that the people of Arrakis, of Arrakeen in particular, know that he is different from the Harkonnens, that he's the good Duke. But Gurney Halleck might bridle at Kynes' familiarity with the Duke, but they need him as a guide to what they're going to see. And also as a guide to what they're going to wear. They're wearing still suits. The characteristic outfit of the Fremen in the desert. Sophisticated piece of layered body wear that is worn underneath garments, underneath cloaks and gowns and whatnot, next to the skin, that is designed not to impede normal perspiration, but to harvest it. So your body perspires normally, but the layers of your still suit catch all of that perspired moisture and filter it through filtration systems and deposit it for your use as redrinkable, recycled water. Does the same thing with urine and feces that collect in catch pockets in the legs of the still suit. And it's all powered by your own breathing, by osmotic action, your foot pumping and whatnot. It's a remarkable piece of technology. But it takes skill to know how to wear it. How to wear it correctly. The Duke has never worn a still suit before. Of course, he comes from a water world. And he's a little bit confused at the beginning of the chapter as to why he would even need it. They're flying out with an escort and with plenty of water. But Kynes has already made it clear to them that he will not guide them unless they're all wearing still suits. Because the discipline of the desert means that you don't speak about what you can control. You speak about what you can't control. So they agree. And Kynes doesn't just want them to wear Fremen manufactured still suits. He wants them to wear them correctly. So he asks the Duke if he can adjust the Duke's still suit, which is not adjusted properly. And it's a tense moment. It's wonderfully done wonderfully evoked by Frank Herbert. The Duke realizes, well, I would have to let him inside my personal body shield. I would have to let him touch me. And that's dangerous. Do I risk it or do I not? And the reader is on edge because we have been privy to Kynes' thoughts, and he is deeply resentful of the Duke. Resentful especially of the fact that the whole night before he was being interrogated by Thufir Hawat, Duke Leto's master assassin and his mentat and his security chief. We're told that as an offhand thing, that Kynes is resentful of the fact that Hawat kept him up all night, questioning him about his background and his motives and his connection to the Imperial world and whatnot. The line is passed over. It's there in order to increase the tension of the chapter, but the thing it made me think was along the lines that I've been thinking this whole read-along, which is how bad Thufir Hawat is at his job. He's a mentat. He's supposed to be able to assess information better by far than a normal human being. He spends half the night questioning someone who has been ordered by the Emperor to betray the Duke, and he doesn't notice it? He doesn't pick up on it? Personally questioning this guy for hours, and he doesn't pick up on the fact? It's just crazy. Just insane that misses him. And also that he isn't aware of the plot. So he's perfectly capable of picking up stray gossip against the Lady Jessica, but how is he not aware, even in the beginning, even a little bit, that the Judge of the Change has been ordered by the Emperor to betray House Atreides? How does he not know this? To say nothing of the fact that Paul's Bene Gesserit trained senses realize, once they're in the ornithopter and out and over the sand, he realizes that the unnatural bulge on one of Kynes' sleeves means that he has a dagger there. Did Gurney Halleck know this? Was this man frisked before he was put in direct proximity with the Duke? The Duke's body shield is not on when he's sitting next to Kynes at the front seat of an ornithopter. Kynes could slit his throat. He could stab him through the heart when he's fixing his still suit. Why does he have a knife? Why does he have a hidden knife? We'll leave aside for the minute that Paul doesn't warn anybody. He notices this thing that apparently no one else has noticed and doesn't say anything. Gurney Halleck would kill Kynes if he knew that he was armed in the presence of the Duke. Just kill him out of hand. He wouldn't be any question about it. I don't care what the repercussions would be. He has to die. He's not told. Paul tells no one. I guess you could make an excuse for Paul that he has taken a read of Kynes and senses that there is no danger here. There are plots and murky stuff. There's definitely a lot that Kynes isn't saying, but there's no danger. But Howard doesn't do that. Anyway, I won't beat up on Thufir Howard all through the book, I promise, especially since he gets a great ending scene. But they go out over the sand, and on the way, Kynes info dumps. But again, Frank Herbert's info dumps are like nobody else's. You don't notice how much information you're getting. Kynes, it's in a natural way. Kynes is naturally going to tell the Duke about what he's about to see. The Harvester goes out. It goes out with a whole bunch of spotters and also a carryall, an immense flying machine that is meant to pick up the whole of the spice harvester when the spotters have spotted what they're out there to look for. And what are they out there to look for? Worm sign. When a large worm is moving at speed in the sand, it will create a bow wave that you can spot on the surface. They're looking for worm sign. Why? Because where there is spice, there are worms. Always, Paul asks? Always. The worms protect the spice. If you start to harvest it, you can be sure that a worm is going to show up. Paul actually asks Kynes, is there a connection between the worms and the spice? And Kynes is rattled. He in this chapter, he says, why does this boy keep asking adult questions? And manages to avoid answering. But Paul comes to the conclusion right away. Keep in mind, we've been told that Paul has the makings of a mentat himself. He comes to the conclusion right away that if there is a connection between the worms and the spice, destroying the worms would destroy the spice. This is a seismic realization that happens and is gone. Kynes also says, once worm sign is spotted, the workers in the factory will work until the last minute to extract as much spice as possible before the carryall comes and lifts the whole thing off the sand. And he's explaining this when the Duke suddenly stops their ornithopter in midair and says, is that worm sign? And yes, it is. He has spotted a worm is approaching this factory, this very one that they're going to look at. A big worm, is approaching them. They have only 20 minutes or so till it gets there. And the men in the factory want to cut it real close. They don't want to leave because they're all going to make a portion of them. They're all going to make a profit from mining this spice. It's tense, but it's not out of the ordinary. Kynes makes sure to tell the Duke they will wait until the last minute. But nobody has seen the carryall in a while. When it gets a little bit closer, when the worm is a little bit closer, people start to wonder. You start to hear radio chatter. Has anyone seen the carryall? Then they ask the spotters, one by one, sound off from your different quadrants of the air. Nope, no sign of it. Nope, no sign of it. Nope, no sign of it. There is no carryall. Which means that this big worm that's coming can swallow this whole factory and everyone in it. Instantly, the Duke he doesn't spend any time wondering where on earth is the carryall, try a different frequency or anything like that. He instantly says, if we and all of our escorts pull out all the extra equipment, we can divide up the men in that thing and get them out. We can save the men. If we overburden the machines, if we try real hard to squeeze everybody in, we can get everybody out except maybe 2 or 3. And he puts that plan forward. Over Gurney Halleck's objections, he puts that plan forward, and the men in the carryall, the men in the spice harvester don't want to go. He has to threaten them. I'll cut it open with a laser if you don't come out on your own. And they do. Hurrying, they come out on their own. They split up into the various aircraft, both the Duke's aircraft and all the spotters, and the Duke's escort. Everybody pitches in. And the whole while that this is happening, the worm is getting closer and closer. When they land and open the doors to the ornithopter, they can smell the pungent odor of cinnamon, of intense spice, not only from the spice layer on the surface, but from the approaching worm. And as it gets closer, they can hear it. They can hear a weird hissing noise as it gets closer and closer. They barely make it off the ground before the worm strikes. As Kynes says to Duke Leto, you're about to see a thing that few have ever witnessed. And we see it. On the page, we see it. the worm strikes, and it is staggeringly huge. It destroys the factory easily. This enormous thing, it destroys it easily. And then slowly starts to disappear, to recede back into the sand. And everyone on the Duke's ornithopter hears what Kynes is saying. Blessed be the Maker. Blessed be his comings and his goings. The Duke even asks him, what is that you're saying? And he doesn't answer. But Paul can sense all kinds of layers of importance here. Something is going on here that is far, far more important than a worm taking a factory. Of course, the Duke is furious that one of his few surviving, one of his few functional factories has been destroyed in such a wasteful manner. He, of course, wants to know what happened to the carryall. And before they were going out there, before they get there, he's questioning Kynes about the thing that we mentioned last time. These botanical testing stations that belong to the Emperor, that seem to be scattered all throughout the temperate regions of Dune. What are they? What's in them? Why do the Harkonnens have no reports about them? Remember, the Duke told Thufir Howard, I want to know if these bases even exist, and I'd like to know what's in them. Kynes is extremely dodgy about these botanical testing stations, and actually loses his temper only once, and says that Dune, this planet, this world, could be made into a paradise if you outworlders weren't so busy grubbing for spice. And then he lets it go. His mask slips just a little there, and it also slips when he watches the worm disappear from the air. I wonder how many times Kynes has actually seen a worm from the air. But that is the end of this epic, epic scene. Except for one grace note at the end. As they're flying back, Kynes thinks to himself. We start the chapter with Kynes thinking to himself, and we end it with him thinking to himself. He can't help but notice that the Duke was concerned with the men, not with the money, not with the spice, and not with the equipment. He was willing to risk the life of his son. He wasn't completely sure that his ornithopter would be able to take off with the extra weight. If it hadn't been, he would have been swallowed by the worm, and so would Paul. He's willing to risk all of that for the men. Kynes thinks to himself, a man like this could command fanatical loyalty. He is one generation removed from that being true. The Atreides style of leadership is charismatic, not despotic, like the Harkonnens. It can command fanatical loyalty, especially if it's mixed with the Missionaria Protectiva. But Kynes notices a man like this, who cares about his man, genuinely cares about his man, could command fanatical loyalty. And then there's a beat, and then Kynes thinks, I'm coming to like this dude. He's coming to like these people. The people he's been told to betray. And that's the end of this chapter. An absolutely epic chapter. Makes up for the lightweight nature of the last one. And it is so signpost as a chapter for Dune that it is a yardstick for all filmed adaptations of this book. It's a large book. You can make your decisions. As a director, you have to make your decisions about what you're going to include and what you're not. I would say that if you're a director, you have to include the powerhouse scenes in this book. There are only 4 of them. You have to include them all. Directors don't always do that. Usually there's one that they leave out. The next one, the next chapter we're going to get to. But this one they have to have. You have to do this. It's just too good. It's just, Frank Herbert wrote this without dreaming that anyone would ever film it. But it's just too good to leave it out. So every film adaptation of this book has done a version of it. And it's so dramatically powerful that it's hard to do it wrong. The 1980s, the 1970s Dune does it as wrong as it can be done. It's still effective. The Sci-Fi Channel's version, quite good. Quite good. Even you watch it now, 30 years after it came out, you can see that there was no money. But it's still quite good. And then there's Denis Villeneuve, who of course had to do this scene in his own big-budget Hollywood extravaganza of Dune. He fiddles with it quite a bit. He fiddles with it more than I would like him to. The scene doesn't actually need any help. But he gives it that help. He gives it a few Hollywood touches, a few Spielberg touches that I guess they're easily ignored. It's still a pretty powerful scene. Especially since the item that you want to stress here is that the Duke's party's escape is narrow. That's not explicitly really hammered home in the scene itself, but it's irresistible when you're filming it, that worm only barely misses taking them. I'm pretty much a connoisseur of this scene as it is filmed. I look for it as a yardstick of what kind of a job the director is going to do with this book. The next powerhouse scene in the book, which we're coming up on immediately, is usually omitted by directors because, believe it or not, despite the fact that it does not involve hundreds of millions of dollars in special effects, it's much harder to do well. But we'll leave that for next time. So that is our scene for today. This is the great spice harvester scene that every fan of this book loves. So I'll wrap this up for now, and we'll be back next time. Thank you, BookTube.